Imagine stepping back tens of thousands of years, long before any ships from Europe cut across the southern seas, long before cities and farms spread across the continent. In that deep silence of ancient time, Australia was already alive with stories. For the First Nations peoples, the Dreamtime was not just the past, it was the eternal present. It was the time when ancestral beings shaped the land, carved out the rivers, raised the mountains, filled the skies with stars, and set every creature in its place. These stories were not written on paper or carved into stone. They were sung, painted on rock, and spoken around fires. They were maps, laws, and sacred truths all at once. Every hill, every waterhole, every bend of the coastline carried meaning because it was touched by creation. This was not mythology in the way we often think of myths. It was a living history, a connection that tied each person to their ancestors and to the land itself for over 60,000 years. Longer than any other continuous culture on earth, Aboriginal peoples lived according to this knowledge. They knew when the rains would come and when the rivers would dry. They followed the tracks of animals, harvested plants in season, and managed the land through a controlled fire, creating grasslands that supported kangaroos and other wildlife. In this way, they shaped the continent as much as the continent shaped them. Their survival was not just about endurance. It was about harmony and understanding that the earth and the people were one and the same. When we imagine the Dreamtime, it's tempting to see it as a distant past, but to the First Nations, it was never gone. The spirits of creation were still present, guiding life, protecting sacred sites, demanding respect. Each clan had its own stories, linked to particular landscapes, and these stories were responsibilities as much as they were beliefs. To sing the songs and pass them on was to keep the world in balance. Elders carried this duty with great care, ensuring that every new generation knew where they came from and what their role was in keeping creation alive. Consider how extraordinary this is. While empires rose and fell in other parts of the world, while Rome crumbled, while dynasties shifted in China, the people of Australia remained, holding a continuous thread back to the very first ancestors. Archaeologists have uncovered ancient tools, cave paintings, and burial sites that confirm this long history. Some rock art, like the paintings of Arnhem Land, may be tens of thousands of years old. They show fish, kangaroos, even extinct creatures, capturing not just survival but imagination, the earliest forms of storytelling still visible today. But this history is not only about endurance, it is also about identity. The Dreamtime gave people a way to see themselves not as separate individuals, but as part of a greater story. A young child could look at a mountain and know that it was not just stone, but the body of an ancestor. A waterhole was not just water, but a sacred gift tied to a creation event. Everything was alive and everything had meaning. That worldview shaped how they lived, how they treated each other, and how they navigated challenges. It is important to remember that this was not a single, unified story. Australia was home to hundreds of nations, each with its own language, its own law, its own dreaming. From the deserts of the interior to the lush coasts, different peoples carried different traditions, yet all shared the same principle, that life and land were inseparable. This diversity was strength. It allowed communities to thrive in environments as varied as the red heart of the continent and the tropical north. When we tell the story of Australia, we often begin with 1788 and the First Fleet. But the truth is, the real beginning stretches back far beyond that, into a time measured not in centuries, but in tens of thousands of years. This is the foundation of Australia. The Dreamtime, the world's oldest living history, still carried in song, dance, and story today. To understand the nation that would one day rise, we must first honor this beginning, because it is more than history. It is a reminder that a land is never empty, that its spirit is always alive, and that the deepest roots of Australia belong to those who first walked it. Centuries after the Dreamtime stories had already etched their meaning into every stone and river, the southern seas began to attract the attention of distant sailors. The world beyond Australia was changing quickly. Europe was entering an age of maps, compasses, and restless curiosity. Ships were pushing further into unknown waters, not just for adventure but for trade, conquest, and survival. And so, in the early 1600s, Dutch navigators became the first Europeans to leave their mark on this vast continent. They were part of the Dutch East India Company, hunting for faster routes to the riches of Asia. What they found instead were rocky coastlines, deserts stretching endlessly inland, and little to tempt a merchant's eye. They charted stretches of the western and northern shores, and with a kind of blunt practicality, they labeled the land New Holland. But these early encounters were fleeting. To the Dutch, Australia was a place of danger, not opportunity. Their records speak of wrecks and inhospitable coasts. Survivors told tales of hunger, heat, and barren landscapes. For a time, the great southern land remained a mystery, left on maps as an outline, a curiosity at the edge of the known world. Yet those first sketches were enough to spark whispers in other European courts. There was land here, vast, unclaimed, and still waiting. It was not until 1770 that the story of European exploration in Australia truly shifted. Captain James Cook, commanding the Endeavour, sailed into the Pacific on a voyage of scientific discovery. His mission was partly astronomical, to chart the transit of Venus, but it also carried a quiet ambition to seek new territories for the British Crown. When Cook's ship reached the eastern coast of Australia, he and his crew stepped onto a shoreline no European had claimed before. To Cook, this land appeared rich and fertile, a stark contrast to the harsh western deserts described by the Dutch. He charted nearly the entire east coast with meticulous care, naming bays, capes, and points as though each stroke of his pen made Britain's presence more real. Yet, Cook's arrival was not into an empty land. Aboriginal peoples had lived along those shores for tens of thousands of years, fishing the reefs, hunting in the forests, and caring for the land as their ancestors. When Cook and his men set foot on the beaches, they entered into a world already alive with law, language, and story. First contact was uneasy.